This is going to be NGINX at Google Scale. Before I get started, though, I'd kind of like to ask you guys some questions. Help me know what metaphors I can use, which groups of people I can make fun of, that sort of thing. Any managers in the room? All right, it's always safe. Oh, it's all you. Okay, all right. Can't make ixnay on the manager jokes. How many people here actively are developing every day? Okay. How many people here are on the sys side and are doing system stuff every day? How many people it's both? Okay. How many people tell system people and or developer people what to do? See, I asked for managers and you didn't raise your hands and now I caught you. That's how I do it. Anybody here from a group that I just totally missed representing? Like designers or anyone? Yeah? Where would you fit in? Pre-sales? Okay. All right, cool. All right, this gives me an idea of who you guys are and we're going to talk about. So first off, I've been working at the booth here the last 2 days and I had a whole bunch of questions that came up repeatedly and I figure I should just get them out of the way up front so that we can all be cool. The first question I get is Google has a cloud platform? And the answer is yes. And I will talk about that and tell you why it's good stuff. The other one I get is, does Google run on NGINX? And the answer is no. This is about running NGINX on our public cloud offering, not necessarily what we do not talk about our web technology publicly for fear of it being heard by someone running an Android phone and then I'm dead, right? Like I don't want that to happen. So we tend not to talk about that public, and that is a joke, right? Like that doesn't happen too much. So the topic is run NGINX at Google Scale. That's like the marketing spin. What it really is you can run NGINX on Google Cloud Platform. And I want to talk about why you would do it and how you would do it. Now, when I first was coming up with this talk, I tried to go more towards the technical, but then hanging out here and talking with people, I realized I had to do a little bit more of the why. Because a lot of the questions I got was, why would we run on Google Cloud Platform? I'd like to answer those questions for you guys. Does that sound like we're all okay with what we signed up for? No one's going to throw tomatoes at me? All right. Or I guess there are bananas out there. That would be worse. All right, so why? Why choose Google Cloud Platform? So I work for Google, and when you think about Google, you think about this. Our marketing people would prefer you now think about this. But when we talk about this for many people, for many non-technical people around the world, this is the dial tone of the internet. If they go to this and they don't get it, they think the internet is broken. And our infrastructure team, the infrastructure team's job is to make sure that if they go to this and they don't get it, it's because the internet is broken and not us. And they do a really good job of it. And the way they do this job is that when you look at Google, you see this. When we look at Google, we see this, right? That Google is basically a very pretty, a API or a front end on infrastructure, on massive amounts of infrastructure. In order to get that point that we are the dial tone of the internet, we have to have more infrastructure than we know what to do with. And the joke is we told them, the infrastructure team, to start building, and then forgot to give them new instructions, and so that's all they've done for the past 15 years is build infrastructure to the point where we have a ridiculous amount of infrastructure, and this has implications for us. And one of the main ones is, from time to time, people at Google come up with crazy ideas, moonshots, depends on who you're talking to, what you call them, but ideas like 10 years ago, let's give everybody a gig of email storage space when everyone else is giving megs. Let's take a picture of every place on Earth and put it into maps so that when you go to an address, you can check that it is not an abandoned field somewhere and is in fact the place where you're supposed to be going. Something that I've had to do many times. And we run into issues with these because these are crazy ideas and we run into things we didn't expect, like evidently Germany doesn't like it when you take pictures of every place in Germany, right? And they get upset about it. And so we have problems, but one of the problems we never have is we never question, can we handle it from an infrastructure standpoint? We can. because we've been building it for 15 years and haven't stopped. So we have this infrastructure, and one of the things we've done is expose it publicly in Google Cloud Platform. The idea is you can run on the same setup, the same data centers, the same processors, the same disk space that we are running on. And so that's the promise of Google Cloud Platform. Now, we have a whole bunch of stuff, and I could play Name the Icon, which is a fun thing we do at the booth when we have the stickers. But we have computing tools that are both platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, so that you can spin up machines or just give us code. Container engine, which we're talking about, which does stuff with the containers. We have storage options, binary storage, NoSQL, SQL, really big SQL. Really big NoSQL. Networking options. We have big data tools that are built on top of the rest of our infrastructure that expose some of our big data knowledge. We have stuff around it for management logs, for operations, for developers, and some mobile tools. So, Cloud Bingo, how am I doing with Cloud Bingo? Have I gotten all the terms? I didn't say no ops, which makes me disappointed because I like to fit the phrase no ops in. But I said most of this. I said data center, big data, NoSQL, SQL, PaaS, right? And we joke about this, but at the end of the day, a cloud provider has to hit a base level of service, right? Like it doesn't matter if we have really cool bespoke individual tools for doing stuff if you can't run a VM or you can't store stuff or you can't, right? So there's a certain base level we need to hit. And my job is to talk about this. Like every provider, whether you're on-prem or cloud, can do everything you see up here. I'm supposed to highlight the differences and what makes us different. And there are two basic areas where we think we're different. One is scale. So we've scaled earlier in our career than other places have, and we try to pass those tools on to you. And price. And I'm going to real quick get through this. But we have a couple of options that make our pricing attractive: permanent pricing, sustained usage discounts, and certain solutions where you can choose a slightly modified version of our stuff that has certain trade-offs and whatnot. So there we go. That's why you would run on Google Cloud, kind of get the markety stuff out of the way. All right, now let's get into the how. Let's actually run some stuff. Let's see what stuff looks like. Okay, so we're going to start simple, and we're going to start with VMs, right? So Compute Engine is our offering for that. We'll just kind of go through the big bullet points here. Basically, you want this, that's what Compute Engine is, right? You want machines that you can just spin up, have access to, and do whatever you want with. That's Compute Engine. So let's see this in action. I'm going to run, assuming I have network connectivity, which may be a big assumption. Okay, good. All right, and I'm going to create a new instance here. It's pretty basic. I'm going to go through this as kind of quickly as it makes sense. I'm going to give it a name, NGINX GUI. You can imply that I made it with the GUI here. I have a whole number of options of processors, right? Like I can go all the way up to 32 processors and 208 gigs of memory, and you'll get charged for it. I can change the image. I'm going to change that to SSD to speed things up just a little bit. I will open up HTTP. Now, one of the cool things about doing it through the GUI is that I can cheat on the command line, do all my stuff through the GUI, get here's how to do it on the command line without having to type all the stuff, all the help, and get this. So this is how to run this on command line. I can take this, run this on our G-Cloud command line tools, but I'm not going to do that because I'm going to create it here. So now that's creating. And we like to say this process should take tens of seconds. Now there's a couple of things I could have done. I could have used a custom image. I could have added a startup script. I could have done a number of things to make this a little bit faster to move forward, like sort of operationally. But I just kind of wanted to show off how easy this can be from the get-go. Also, this whole part where I'm talking is me stalling, waiting for the VM to spin up. And it spun up. So like I said, tens of seconds. And this is my favorite part. I'm just going to terminal in. And you'll notice I just clicked on the browser and I didn't pull down any certs. I didn't have to do any like handshaking. In a second, I will have command line access, right? So now you know exactly what I'm going to do here, right? I'm going to go apt get update. I'm going to forget that I need to be root, and so I'll do sudo bang bang. I'll run update again. I'll update it. Let's see, how fast is our network? Sudo apt get install NGINX. Yes. Let's see. And one more. Sudo service NGINX start. It helps if I spell it right. Just adding extra letters in there doesn't really help. All right, and then so I can go and I see that I have an external IP on NGINX GUI that we set up before. So go through it, and there we are. So in under a minute, I had NGINX up and running on a VM, and I never had to I could do it right through the browser. I didn't have to do a lot of configuring, and just got to it real quick. What do you guys, was that at least a nice process for spinning up a VM? I see a couple people saying, remember when I said in the beginning that this better be good? No, you're not doing it. See another people smiling, good. All right, so that is running with a VM. That's Compute Engine. What do I have to say about Compute Engine? Let's see, we did that. So pros, it's infinite configurable, it's a VM. This is a very manual process, so you build up these machines and you're kind of in charge of scaling them. The startup time is tens of seconds, and you have a lot of different performance options. The cons, management is on you, right? Like I'm spinning up individual VMs. I have to make sure that those machines stay patched and all of that. Scale is also on you, but we can help. We have auto scaling technology that you can add, you can configure as part of starting up these VMs. And you have some criteria by which you could say, hey, look, if processor on any one of these machines gets up past a certain point, let's spin up some more nodes, exactly like these images. But sometimes you do this and people say, well, that seems like a lot of work. Is there anything a little bit easier? And so we have something called Cloud Launcher, which you should be familiar with from other cloud platforms. We have two different flavors of them. Bitnami, which is a cross-cloud image service, and they have basically popular images that work on multiple clouds, and click to deploy. That's really easy. If I go and look at that, here's Cloud Launcher. I have a whole bunch of different options. I will look at the NGINX options. I have 4 of them. I want to get started. One of the things we just announced, I believe they announced yesterday morning at one of the keynotes, was that we now have NGINX Plus on Cloud Launcher. So if you want to run NGINX Plus, so actually let me show you NGINX first. So here's just a normal one. Notice that one of the things we do is we try to give a pretty good estimate of how much this is going to cost you. You'll see that we set you up on a small instance. It's going to be about $5 a month. Because you're running all month, we discount it by $1.75. You don't get charged for the software, and so it ends up being about $4.50 a month for this particular setup. If I go back to NGINX Plus, it's going to be a little bit more because you're being charged for NGINX on top of our hardware requirements, and it's got a little bit beefier machine behind it. 21 cents an hour for NGINX Plus, and you don't have to worry about buying a license or setting it up with NGINX. We promise we'll pay NGINX the money that we collect from you guys for this. And they'll come after us, I imagine, if we don't. So that is Cloud Launcher. Now, Cloud Launcher, let's see. There are some pros and cons with this. Pros, preloaded VMs. They're customized, they're kind of optimized to work with that system under our offering. And then after you start them up, you can do whatever you want with them because they're just VMs, right? Cons, you might only like systems that you yourself configure, which is not, a shocking prejudice for people in our line of work. We understand that, but that's the trade-off. All right, I'm going to pause now and ask, are there any questions about any of the things I've talked about so far? Because now we're going to get to slightly thornier issues. Any questions about what I talked about so far? No? All right. So let's go. Wouldn't it be great if there was more? Right? So I'm going to talk about a couple different technologies we have. This one is a beta technology, so take it with a grain of salt. It's called Managed VMs. It's an extension of App Engine. It uses Docker to run containers on our system. And you can use either Google configured containers, which are very specifically flavored versions of stuff that we run, or custom containers that have whatever you want in it. I'm not going to necessarily show off the full demo. I'm just going to start showing off like the configuration that makes all this happen. The reason being is that, and I'll talk about it when I talk about the cons, because it is a beta technology. So, managed VMs. So you'll see here I have a Docker file, a relatively simple Docker file that just is pulling down an NGINX image, copying some configuration over to it. The one thing that's sort of unique or that's different about this is that I have to make sure that I'm listening on 8080. Part of running on our service is you have to serve internally from 8080. And then that's pretty much it. And then this is all running. Now I actually have one of these up and running. So let me fire that up. We'll just see that it is in fact running. Instances, versions, there we go, and there. So there's welcome to NGINX running, and it's the same, let's see, it's the same thing that's running here in index HTML. So pretty basic, pretty simple, real quick rundown. So pros of this are, it's a really easy way to get started with containers, right? You don't have to spin up a whole lot of stuff. We'll actually do all the Docker building remotely for you, so you don't even have to have Docker on your system. If you, again, just want to sort of play around with containers if you haven't done so already. It also works with our auto-scaling tech, which is really kind of nice, so that you can use the compute engine auto-scaling tools and techniques to scale up these managed VMs that you have, independent of doing it just with Docker, which is really helpful. Cons, it's a beta technology and it's still evolving. And so it can be a little slow. So slow that I did not feel comfortable on stage, like waiting for it to finish. That being said, it's a really great way of like, I just want to dip my toes in Docker, or I just want to dip my toes in kind of cloud hosting containers. It's a good way of getting started. Is that all we got? So how many people here saw Kelsey Hightower talk about Kubernetes? Okay. So Kubernetes is the open source version. We run our own version of Kubernetes called Container Engine. It is actually Kubernetes, but it's us managing it as opposed to like, well, it's something sort of like Kubernetes, and it's not quite Kubernetes. It is actually Kubernetes that we manage. We install some of the default services of Kubernetes, like DNS, like automatically for you. We just make that decision. And we wrap it up and call it Container Engine. You can manage it with the Kubernetes command line tools. You can also manage it with some of the management you do of it, you can do with our tools. And the idea is, if you're coming at it from the clouds, the Google Cloud side, you manage with our tools. If you're coming at it from the Kubernetes side, the tools are still familiar. These are Kubernetes tools. So it's containers as a service. The idea is that instead of saying, here's my script to build all this stuff for me, you just describe your environment the way you want it, and Kubernetes takes care of managing it. So let me just kind of give you an example of how this would work. So I have a Docker file, and that Docker file is running NGINX and PHP connected, right? I copy some files over. I would probably also copy some application files over, and then that gives me my front end, right? And then I have another Docker file that's my database. I set up some stuff about that, and then that becomes my back end. So I now have a front end and a back end, and each of these will have certain rules, right? Like expose port 80. With the back end, I'm going to expose 3306 selectively. I'll probably pass in some environmental variables about the administrative user for the MySQL database. Probably have some disk mounting info because as much as I want my Docker containers to be ephemeral, I don't want my disk to be ephemeral, right? Because that's bad. All know that. And then I write a I write a Kubernetes config file that says, hey, make sure there are always 3 front-end servers running and 2 back-end servers running. And Kubernetes, or in this case, Container Engine, just makes sure that happens for you. And then, so if I go through and change things and say, hey, make sure there's always 5 front-end servers and 2 back-end servers, it'll just do that automatically for you. So let's see what this actually looks like from a management perspective. Actually managing the services. Let's see. So I have this stuff all scripted out because watching somebody type and have typos and then back, like I don't want to do that. So I have scripts, it should spell out everything we do. Now, before I did this, let me just go through. Basically what it's doing is it's using Kubernetes, CTL create against all of the Docker, all the Kubernetes files that I have, which are YAML files, and I'll walk us through all of them. But basically, it's just going through and creating these services. Now, I've done some other stuff to get ready for this. I built all my images already. I started up a cluster. I made a disk for MySQL to run on. I did all that ahead of time. All of that from command line takes about, depending on your network speed, about 10 minutes. Because you're actually building Docker images and moving Docker images around. So there's some overhead to moving stuff around. But once you get that kind of solid, you can up and down services relatively quickly, which I just did there. If I look through these, you'll see that I had a front-end controller file, the PHP RC, a MySQL pod file, and a MySQL service file. I'll take you through those and show you what they do. So I'll start with the PHP replication controller file. This basically says I all the time want 2 copies of my PHP front end running. I want you to use this image to do it, and I want to make sure you make port 80 open all the time. And then the other thing that I had there was you'll see that I had a CTL expose RC front end controller create external load balancer. So basically in one step I created this replication controller and said, hey, handle load balancing port 80 so that all of these pods will be used equally. So if I look, kubectl get pods, you'll see that I have 3 pods running. 2 of them are the front end controller, and one of them is MySQL. If I say kubectl get services, you'll see that I have 2 services, one 3 services, but Kubernetes we're not going to deal with. Front end controller and MySQL, and if I look over here, I have a public URL. I'm sorry, a public host. I'll take that and we'll run my app. And you'll see that I already had data in the app version of this, already running and already set to go. Now, if I go through, well, actually, before I go through and kill it, I want to show you adding more replicas to the system. So right now, I have 2 pods running. If I get pods again, we'll say I've got 2 front end and 1 back end. I'm going to go through and let's scale it up. Scale. RC, front end controller, replicas. Let's go 5, 4. We'll go 4. I'm not going to do 1,000 because I know it'll fail, and I'll tell you why it'll fail in a second. Hold on. Okay, if we look at pods, I wasn't fast enough. Sometimes you can catch them and they're not ready, but they all spun up And so now I've got 4 of them, and I can scale down just as easily. You know what? I'll go 10, not quite 1,000. And good, I caught, not all of them are up and ready. I was able to get in fast enough, so they're still spinning up. If I go through now, there should be more. Yep, a couple more came online. And basically, it'll take like a couple seconds and then it'll all be up and running. And I can then scale down. I can scale back to 1. Scaling down is a little bit faster. So obviously, I can do a number of things with this. I can, if I know that my load is always going to be heavier sometime of the day, I can schedule spinning up the extra nodes to handle extra capacity. If I know it's going to be lower, I can take it down. But it's all very proactive. Like I don't react to load and maybe miss some users. I can ahead of time say, like, I know these are going to be heavier times and spin up more instances of stuff. And then of course I can stop this just as easily. And if I stop this, you'll see that I'm killing everything. And so when I go to this URL, nothing, right? Because nothing's there anymore and we're all set to go. So that is, in a nutshell, Kubernetes. Before I sort of sum up Container Engine on Google Cloud Platform, any questions? So I went through a lot there. I saw some faces, may or may not be. Any questions about this? No? It's the end of the day, you guys are like, we're, okay. All right, so let me sum up Container Engine. So there's some pros here, right? You can manage a large number of containers. Now someone said, why not spin up 1,000? Because I know the machine that was hosting it, there's still, like, even though we're abstracting away hardware, there's still hardware involved, right? And so I know that machine won't be able to take 1,000 of, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I didn't want to take the risk of breaking something on stage, right? I'd rather say no and explain it here. So at some point, you do have to deal with hardware, but the great thing about this is you can run large amounts of pods, large amounts of containers on whatever hardware you have. On Container Engine, you also get the benefit of having Kubernetes without having to set up Kubernetes. It's a complicated thing. That's one set of things you don't have to deal with by running it on your own systems. And then the underlying hardware, I say with quotes, is resizable. So the way it gets set up is that we run Kubernetes on Compute Engine, and Compute Engine is how we're scaling out under the underlying system. You can resize Container Engine. Not necessarily Kubernetes. I'm a little bit vague on how this works at just the Kubernetes side, but because we're running a because Container Engine is running on our stuff, we can actually dynamically allocate more stuff to it with just by saying resize. And what that's going to do is it's going to add more Kubernetes servers to hold your pods and containers and all that good stuff. The cons of this is that I just went through and explained that Container Engine runs Kubernetes on top of Compute Engine, which is our VM system, right? Like, there are a lot of layers to this, and it's difficult. So, and you're running a container on top of Kubernetes that is on Container Engine, which is running on Compute Engine, which is running on hardware somewhere abstracted. It's a lot to just sort of just dip your toes in, right? Like, it's like, you already have to be fooling around with Docker. You already need to be kind of thinking about how to architect your stuff as containers. And so it takes a while of fooling around this world before Container Engine's value really comes to play. Now, you certainly can run a one pod, like one container Kubernetes setup or a Container Engine setup, and you can get some value in that. You eventually, when you need to scale up, you can scale up pretty easily. But again, it's sort of hard to justify doing all of that unless you know that is the way you're going to head. So with that, I'm going to kind of conclude up and sort of bring everything home. So if I can only impress upon you 3 things from this whole talk, the first one would be that GCP is awesome. right? We can pretty much host anything you throw at us with a focus on trying to make our price as competitive as we possibly can, and we have features around scale that differentiate us from other of the cloud providers. You can run NGINX on us, and it could be the open source version. It doesn't have to be NGINX Plus, and you can run it in various different ways. You can run it on Compute Engine directly. You can run it through managed VMs. You can do it through Container Engine. You could also, get crazy about this and run Kubernetes yourself and not go through Container Engine and run NGINX on NGINX on Kubernetes on top of Compute. Like, you have a lot of options, and we can deliver it a whole bunch of different ways to you. And then the third is that you can run NGINX Plus. Obviously, you can just buy a license and run that license on our machines as Compute Engine, but you can also run through our Cloud Launcher service, which will allow you to pay NGINX without having to have separate accounts for both of us. And the great thing about it is that you can, instead of having to get a year license that you use for a year, you can say, you know what, I'm only going to need certain licenses for so long, so I don't have to spin up full things, and you can probably save yourself a fair amount of money by selectively starting up and stopping NGINX Plus servers. So those are the three things. If you have any feedback or you want to heckle me at all, my Twitter handle is @tpryan. Please feel free to, if I'll be around for questions and whatnot, but if I don't get to them, please feel free to drop me a line via that way. I get back to people pretty quickly. If you want this presentation, it's at bit.ly/tpryan NGINX. And with that, I'm going to open things up for any questions. Any questions? Yes. What are the greatest number of containers? The largest number of containers on one Kubernetes cluster. That's a great question, and your mileage is going to vary depending on how much they're doing, right? If you've got a very processor-intensive thing, it's going to be less. If you've got what's the biggest cluster we've run on one that I will say that we will say will work? I don't know what we will say will work. The largest cluster I've seen work before we've had to split to another cluster is 100 nodes back when we were in beta, back before we got onto GA. That number I think has gone up because to get to GA we had to go through a whole bunch of hoops, but that was the largest number of clusters I've seen run before we ran into crazy issues. What's that? Yeah. Are they going to tell us? Right. Said, I don't know. So I honestly don't know. We haven't gone that high, and so it's not come up that often. And when I say that, I mean me, not Google itself, right? But if you drop me a line at tpryan at Google, I'll get a better answer for you. Is that cool? All right. Any other questions? Yes. I have never gotten that question, and I am so glad you asked. So the question is, so we give you 300, if you sign up for Google Cloud Platform, you get $300 for 2 months. The question is, how's the fastest way that you can blow through that, right? It's an awesome question. So I've seen people blow through it using BigQuery. So BigQuery has a whole bunch of data sets. You can load large amounts of data onto it and then just ask crazy questions. So I was visiting Bucharest. The guy before us was Adobe. I was at the Adobe office in Bucharest talking Google Cloud Platform. And they started saying, I do this thing with BigQuery where I start asking who's the biggest, who got the most hits on Wikipedia for a given range of time, and Wikipedia's logs are open. I have some demographic data that's open, I can combine it. And so they ended up asking questions like, well, who's the biggest Romanian movie star on Wikipedia? And unfortunately, it was an adult star, and it was a little bit embarrassing. So we started doing questions like that. So that's one way. The fastest way I have blown through through any sort of time on Google Cloud Platform is I did a demo of App Engine. App Engine is our platform as a service. It scales. I didn't talk about it. Long story short, whatever kind of traffic you throw at it, it'll just serve it. And I was testing that, so I sent 16 million requests in 100 seconds. And it worked great the first time. Then I went to run it again the second time, and it was it blew out because we have a daily limit on how much you can query, and it's configurable so that when you get successful, you don't run up, before you get successful, you don't run up huge bills like doing something accidental. But yeah, I routed through my entire daily query, and it's high because I work for Google using that. So those are the two ways I've done it. I think also spinning up a 32 core, 208 gig memory machine, and then just running the hell out of that will also do it for you. Those are the ways that I would do it. That's an awesome question, man. Thank you so much. All right, I think we are running up on the time. So I will be available if you guys have, we have 3 minutes left. But I'll be available if you guys have questions. Please feel free to come up and ask me, and I'll also be at the booth there, out there if you have any more questions. Thank you guys very much.